The dungeon was cold, darker than the deepest cave, and smelled of damp stone. Water dripped slowly from the ceiling, each drop echoing like the ticking of a clock. In the farthest corner, chained to the wall, sat Kaera. Her once bright skin had dulled to a pale shade, her hair tangled and matted, her eyes hollow but still alive. 13 years, she whispered to herself. 13 years in this place. The wall behind her was scratched with hundreds of small lines, each one a day she survived. She had been taken when she was only 17. Her home burned, her family slaughtered. The alien baron had claimed her as his property, his trophy to show power. Every day he reminded her that escape was impossible. Every night she dreamed of freedom, but dreams did not break chains. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, heavy and slow. Kaera knew that sound, the baron's boots. Her chains rattled as she straightened, hiding the sharp piece of metal she had. Stolen 2 days ago, the baron appeared, tall, with armor made from the bones of his enemies, his reptilian face twisted into a cruel smile. "You are still here, little bird," he mocked, his voice like a hiss, "and you will die here." He laughed and turned away, his guards following. Kaera's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of a new thought. She could not die here. Later, she heard voices outside her cell. 2 guards were whispering, their words slipping through the cracks of the door. "A human," one said. "I saw a human in the city. Impossible." The other replied, "Humans never come here maybe, but I saw him with my own eyes." Kaera's heart skipped. She had not seen a human in 13 years. The baron's world was far from Earth, and humans were rare and dangerous, she remembered. Stories her father had told her. Humans were stubborn, reckless, and impossible to control. If a human was here, maybe, just maybe, he could help her. That night, she barely slept. Her mind raced with plans. The sharp metal shard she had hidden under her rags felt heavy in her hand. She thought about using it to fight, but the baron's guards were too many. She needed someone from outside, someone who could slip through the city unseen. The thought of a human kept returning. If he was truly here, she had to find a way to reach him. Morning came with the sound of the market above. Chains clinked as the guards dragged her out of the cell. Today, the baron wanted to display her in the market square. Not to sell, she was too broken, too weak, but to remind the people of his power. Kaera's bare feet touched the hot stone road. She winced but kept walking. Eyes from the crowd followed her, some with pity, others with cruelty. And then she saw him. He stood near a fruit stall, tall, with sun-browned skin and sharp eyes. He wore a dusty jacket, his hands casually in his pockets, but his gaze was not casual. It was locked on her. For a moment, their eyes met. Something passed between them. A silent understanding. Then the guard shoved her forward, breaking the moment. But Kaera had seen it. That look was not the look of a traitor or a slaver. It was the look of someone who had already made a decision. Back in the dungeon, she could not stop thinking about him. Who was he, and why had he looked at her that way? Was he here for her? Or was it just her desperate hope twisting reality? The shard in her hand felt sharper. She had survived 13 years of darkness, pain, and humiliation. She would not let this chance slip away. If that human was real, if he was truly here, she would find a way to speak to him. That night, as the guards dozed and the city above grew quiet, Kaera pressed her back against the cold wall and whispered to herself, "I will not die in chains. I will escape, and if the human helps me, I will owe him my life. But if I have to spill blood to be free, then so be it." The dripping water kept its slow rhythm. The wind from the small barred window carried the scent of the city. Somewhere out there, the human was walking those streets. And somewhere deep inside her, for the first time in 13 years, hope was alive again. Asterisk. The human's name was Ethan. He had been on this alien world for only 3 days. 3 days of walking through streets where every face was unfamiliar, every voice strange. He kept his head low, his hands hidden inside the pockets of his worn jacket. Humans were rare here, too rare, and the wrong attention could get him killed. Ethan had not come for adventure. He had come for a job, a smuggler's job. The kind that paid well but could end in a shallow grave. He was supposed to meet a contact in the market, trade a stolen star map for credits, and leave the planet by nightfall. But life had a way of throwing his plans into chaos. It happened. When he first saw her, the alien girl, thin as a shadow, chains around her wrists. Being dragged through the market, she looked like she had been carved from sorrow itself. Her hair was tangled, her eyes tired, but they still burned with something. Not just pain, but defiance. And then she looked at him. That moment hit him harder than any blaster shot. Her eyes didn't plead in the way most broken slaves did. They challenged him. It was as if she was silently daring him, telling him she would escape, with or without him. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, not since the war. He remembered the prison camps, rows of cages, faces staring through the bars. Some begged, some cried, but there had been a few. A few who looked at him the way she just had, the ones who hadn't given up, the ones worth saving, and every single one of them had haunted him ever since. The merchant at the fruit stall tried to start a conversation with him. Ethan barely heard it. His focus locked on the girl. She was shoved forward by the guard, disappearing into the crowd, and just like that, she was gone. But Ethan knew he wasn't leaving this planet without finding her. That night, in the dim corner of a cheap inn, Ethan sat over a cup of alien liquor. The drink burned his throat, but his mind was on the girl. He asked the innkeeper casual questions, pretending not to care. The man laughed. "That's the Baron's pet," he said. "She's been his prisoner for longer than most of us have been alive. No one gets near her without ending up dead." Ethan didn't laugh. Instead, he memorized every detail, every rumor, every whisper. By the second day, he had learned enough. The Baron kept her in the lower dungeons of his fortress. The walls were thick, the guards loyal, and the place was surrounded by a maze of underground tunnels that hadn't been used in decades. The tunnels were dangerous, full of collapsed sections, but to Ethan, they were a gift, a way in. He spent hours in the marketplace, buying old maps from junk traders. One scrap of parchment caught his attention. Faded lines showing an outdated sewer system. It was risky, maybe even suicidal, but it was the only path he could take. Late in the afternoon, he sat on the steps of a closed shop. A young alien boy approached him, selling cheap trinkets. Ethan bought one and slipped a coin into the boy's hand. Then he leaned close and whispered, "You work near the Baron's fortress?" The boy's eyes widened. Ethan smiled in a way that wasn't quite friendly. "Tell me about the guards." By nightfall, he knew the changing of shifts, the blind corners, and which guard had a taste for stolen liquor. It was enough to start a plan, but plans were useless without timing. And timing meant getting a message to the girl. The next day, Ethan returned to the market. He moved through the crowd until he spotted her again. This time she was standing beside the Baron himself, displayed like a trophy. The Baron's laughter cut through the noise of the crowd. Ethan kept his distance, but when Kaera's gaze met his, he made the smallest of gestures, a tap of his finger on his wrist, a signal for time, for waiting. She didn't react, but he knew she understood. Back in the shadows of the alleys, Ethan prepared. The stolen liquor was hidden in his pack, ready to bribe the one guard he could sway. The old sewer map was folded in his pocket, and in his mind, he saw every step, every turn, every locked door. He would have one chance, one night to get her out before the Baron realized what was happening. As the second sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. He wasn't doing this for money. He wasn't even doing it out of revenge. He was doing it because she had looked at him like he was the only hope left in the galaxy. And maybe she was right. In the distance, the fortress lights glowed like the eyes of a predator. The streets grew quieter, the shadows longer. Ethan adjusted the grip on his pack and started walking toward the tunnels. If everything went right, she'd be free by morning. If everything went wrong, they'd both be dead. But Ethan had already made his choice, and he wasn't turning back. The night was silent, but Ethan's mind was loud. He sat in the corner of the dim room he had rented. The sewer map spread across the table. A single lantern lit the faded lines, showing him the paths beneath the Baron's fortress. Most of the tunnels were blocked, but there was one that might still be open. An old maintenance passage that connected to the lower dungeons. It was narrow, dark, and half-flooded, but it was a way in. He traced the route with his finger, memorizing every turn. One wrong step in those tunnels could mean drowning. But he had no choice. If he tried the main gates, they'd cut him down before he took 2 steps. The tunnels were dangerous, but they were invisible. And invisible was the only way to survive. Earlier that day, Ethan had made his first move. In a dark alley near the market, he had found the guard who liked stolen liquor. A thin, nervous alien with shifting eyes. Ethan had offered him a flask, the kind of drink that cost more than a month's pay. The guard's greed had won, and after a few sips, his tongue had loosened. He had told Ethan the exact time the patrol changed in the dungeon hallway. A 10-minute gap, no more. 10 minutes to slip in, find Kaera, and get out before the alarm was raised. But Ethan knew it wouldn't be that simple. Kaera had been in chains for 13 years. She wouldn't be able to run far or fast. He would have to carry her most of the way, and carrying someone in the dark, slippery tunnels would slow him down. It was a risk he couldn't ignore. Still, he told himself, better slow than dead. He packed light, a coil of rope, 2 glow sticks, a small blaster, and the EMP grenade he had been saving for emergencies. The grenade could disable any trackers or cameras for a few seconds. Seconds might be the difference between life and death. By midnight, the city above had gone quiet. The market stalls were empty, the streets nearly deserted. Ethan slipped into the shadows, heading for the old drainage entrance he had found earlier. It was hidden behind a collapsed wall. Covered in moss and rusted metal, he crouched, pulling away the loose stones until the opening was big enough to crawl through. The stench hit him first, rotting water, mold, and something else. The scent of old death. The tunnel floor was wet. Every step making a soft splash. He moved slowly, the map in his mind, counting each turn. Some sections were so narrow he had to squeeze sideways. The walls were slick, and once he nearly slipped into a pool of black water. But he kept going. Somewhere ahead, a faint hum vibrated through the air. It was the fortress generators. He was close meanwhile. In the dungeon, Kaera sat awake. The night was colder than usual, her thin clothes no protection against the damp. She clutched the metal shard she had kept hidden all this time. She didn't know if the human would come. She didn't even know his name. But her gut told her that something was about to happen. Her chains rattled as she shifted, her ears catching the faintest sound. A drip of water from somewhere it shouldn't be. She lifted her head, listening harder. In the tunnel, Ethan reached the final section. A rusted grate blocked the way, its metal corroded but still strong. He took out a small cutting tool from his belt, the kind used by mechanics. The sparks were faint, but every sound felt like thunder in the still air. After a minute, the grate loosened enough for him to pull it free. He slipped inside, boots silent on the stone. The dungeon hallway was dim, lit by weak, flickering lamps. He kept to the shadows, counting steps. There, the cell he was looking for. Kaera's head lifted the moment she saw him, her eyes wide. But silent, Ethan stepped closer, pressing a finger to his lips. Then he pulled a small device from his pocket and aimed it at the lock. A faint beep, a spark, and the lock clicked open. Kaera hesitated. She had dreamed of this moment for 13 years, yet it felt unreal. "Can you walk?" Ethan whispered. She nodded, but when she stood, her legs trembled so badly she almost fell. Without another word, Ethan wrapped an arm around her, steadying her. "We have 10 minutes, he murmured. They moved quickly, staying close to the wall. Every step was a battle against time. Kaera's breath came in sharp gasps, the weight of chains still fresh on her body. They reached the grate, and Ethan helped her crawl into the tunnel. The cold water soaked her feet, but she didn't complain. Behind them, somewhere in the fortress, a voice shouted. The guard change had ended. Their time was up. Ethan quickened his pace, but Kaera stumbled. He lifted her into his arms without slowing down. The tunnels echoed with the sound of boots above. One wrong move, one loud noise, and they'd be caught. The tunnel exit was ahead, the faint light of the city shining through. Ethan felt a surge of hope, but just before they reached it, a beam of red light swept across the tunnel. A tracking drone, its mechanical eye locking on them. Ethan cursed under his breath, pulling the EMP grenade from his belt. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it toward the drone. The blast filled the tunnel with a sharp crack. The lights died. The hum of machinery stopped. Go, he urged, his voice low but urgent. They crawled out into the cool night air. Kaera gulped the fresh breeze like it was the first breath she had taken in years. But Ethan didn't stop to rest. He knew the Baron would already be sending hunters. Their escape had just begun. The night air was cold against Kaera's skin. For a moment, she stood frozen, feeling the wind brush her face. A sensation she had almost forgotten after 13 years underground. Ethan didn't let her stand still for long. Move, he whispered, guiding her into the shadows. The city was still sleeping, but somewhere behind them, the alarm would soon rise. They hurried down a narrow alley, Kaera's bare feet silent on the damp ground. Her legs shook, every step a reminder of the years she had spent chained. Ethan stayed close, his eyes scanning the rooftops and the corners. He knew the Baron's men would not waste time. Once the alarm rang, hunters would flood the streets. They reached the end of the alley, where a broken stone wall led to an old drainage path. Ethan stopped, listening. In the distance, faint but growing, came the sound of shouting. The alarm bells hadn't started yet, but the voices were moving fast. They know, Ethan muttered under his breath. Kaera's breathing was ragged. She tried to keep up, but her legs buckled again. Without hesitation, Ethan lifted her into his arms. You're light, he said quietly, though his jaw was tight with focus. Carrying her slowed him, but it was faster than letting her stumble. They moved through the drainage path, stepping over rubble and broken pipes. A sudden noise made Ethan stop. The low growl of alien hounds echoed down the passage. Kaera's eyes widened. She knew that sound. The Baron's hunters, their noses could track scent for miles. Ethan didn't wait. He turned sharply, heading for a half-collapsed stairway that led upward. The stairs ended at a metal hatch. Ethan shoved it open with his shoulder, the rusty hinges groaning. They emerged into a scrapyard. Mountains of broken ships and twisted metal surrounding them like jagged teeth. It smelled of oil, rust, and smoke. The perfect place to hide, if they could lose the hounds first. Ethan ducked behind a pile of scrap. Setting Kaera down from his pack, he pulled out a small vial and smashed it against the ground. The sharp scent of alien chemical smoke filled the air. It'll mess with their noses, he explained quickly. Kaera nodded, still catching her breath. But even through the smoke, they could hear the hounds closing in. They weaved between the piles of scrap, each step taking them deeper into the maze. Twice, they had to duck as searchlights swept overhead. Kaera's heart pounded. She had dreamed of freedom for so long, but now it felt like they were running straight toward death. Ethan stopped again, holding up a hand. Voices, close, too close, through a narrow gap in the metal. They saw 3 of the Baron's hunters moving past, armored and armed. The hounds sniffed the ground, confused by the chemical scent, but they were still searching. Ethan leaned close to Kaera, his voice barely a whisper. When I say run, you run. Kaera's fingers tightened around the metal shard she still carried. She wasn't strong, but she was ready to fight if she had to. A sudden clatter rang out from the far side of the scrapyard, a loose piece of metal falling. The hunters turned toward the sound. Ethan seized the moment, pulling Kaera forward. They ran through the maze, slipping into a gap between 2 massive hulls of derelict ships. The space was tight, forcing them to crouch low. Behind them, the shouts of the hunters grew louder. They were following. The path ahead ended at a steep drop. Below was a dry canal littered with debris. Ethan didn't hesitate. He jumped, landing hard, then reached up to catch Kaera as she slid down. The impact jarred her bones, but she stayed silent above them. Boots pounded against the metal edge. One of the hunters leaned over, spotting them. A beam of red light shot down, searing the ground where they had been standing a second before. "Move!" Ethan barked, pulling her toward the far end of the canal. A broken drainage pipe jutted from the wall ahead. It was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Ethan pushed Kaera inside first, then crawled after her. The smell inside was foul, the space so narrow that his shoulders scraped the sides. But it was dark, and for now, that was enough. They crawled until the pipe opened into a small storage room. It was dusty, abandoned, filled with crates covered in alien markings. Ethan leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Kaera sat on the floor, her hands shaking. "We're not safe yet," he said quietly. "They'll search the whole sector." Kaera met his eyes. She wanted to thank him, to ask why he was risking his life for her. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply said, "What now?" Ethan glanced at the crates, then back toward the tunnel they had crawled through. "Now we make them lose our trail completely." Outside, the sound of the hounds was fading. The chemical smoke had worked, at least for now. But Ethan knew it wouldn't last. The Baron would not give up. Not until he had her back, and if they stayed in the city. It was only a matter of time before the hunters found them. They would have to leave. Beyond the city walls lay open wastelands, dangerous in their own way, but at least they wouldn't be surrounded. Ethan began checking the crates for anything useful: tools, food, even old ship parts. Kaera stood slowly, her legs still weak. Her fingers brushed against the wall, feeling the rough stone. For the first time in years, she wasn't behind bars. The thought gave her strength. In the distance, a faint horn sounded. The Baron's hunters were regrouping. Ethan grabbed her hand. "It's time to go," he said, and together, they slipped into the night once more. The city behind them, the wastelands ahead. Freedom was close, but so was death. The Baron stood in the center of his fortress hall. The broken grate from Kaera's cell lay at his feet, a silent insult to his power. His reptilian eyes burned with rage. "Find them," he growled to his captains, his voice like grinding stone. "Bring the human to me alive and bring the girl back in chains." The hunters assembled quickly, armored aliens with blasters strapped to their sides, their faces hidden behind steel masks. Beside them, the Baron's hounds strained against their chains, snarling, eager for the chase. A horn echoed across the city walls. The signal for a full manhunt. Every alley, every rooftop, every hidden tunnel would be searched. No one escaped the Baron, or at least, no one had until tonight. Far beyond the fortress, Ethan and Kaera had left the city behind. The high stone walls were now distant shadows under the twin moons. The wasteland stretched ahead, endless dunes of red sand, jagged rock formations, and the occasional skeleton of some long-dead beast. The wind here was sharp, carrying the taste of dust and metal. It was a place where few survived without preparation, and they had nothing but a rope, a small blaster, and the will to keep moving. Kaera stumbled more than once, her legs still weak, but she refused to slow them down. She kept her eyes forward, her jaw tight. Every step was a promise to herself. Never again in chains. Ethan led the way, his sharp gaze scanning the horizon. He knew the Baron's hunters wouldn't give up. "They'll follow us," he said quietly. "So we can't just run. We have to disappear." Kaera nodded, but she didn't understand how they could vanish in a place with no cover. The dunes offered no hiding spots, and the open ground meant they could be seen for miles. By dawn, the first signs of pursuit appeared. On the horizon, dark shapes moved, small at first, but growing larger. The Baron's hunters. riding speeder bikes that cut across the sand like knives. Ethan cursed under his breath. "They're faster than us," he said. "We need to make them slower." He led Kaera toward a cluster of jagged rocks, their black surfaces rising like broken teeth from the sand. The narrow paths between them twisted and turned. It was the perfect place to set traps. Ethan rummaged through his pack, pulling out a coil of wire and 2 small charges. "Stay behind me," he told Kaera. As they moved, he strung a wire low between the rocks, connecting it to the charges. By the time they reached the far side, the first of the hunters had entered the maze. A sharp blast shook the rocks. The lead speeder flipped, throwing its rider into the sand. The hounds barked wildly, their handlers shouting. Ethan didn't wait to see the damage. He grabbed Kaera's hand, pulling her deeper into the wasteland. But the Baron's forces adapted quickly. Some dismounted, pursuing on foot while others circled around. By midday, the heat became another enemy. The twin suns burned overhead, the sand hot enough to blister skin. Kaera's steps slowed, her breathing heavy. Ethan gave her his water flask without hesitation, even though it was their last. As they moved, Kaera's thoughts turned to the years in the dungeon. She remembered the Baron's laughter, the way he had paraded her like a possession. The rage inside her was stronger than her exhaustion. "I won't let him take me again," she said, her voice low but fierce. Ethan glanced at her and gave a grim smile. "Good," he said, "because I'm not letting him either." By late afternoon, they reached a canyon. Its steep cliffs offered shade and a narrow path through the rock. Ethan led Kaera inside, the air cooler here. They followed the twisting path until it widened into a flat stretch of ground. Ethan stopped, crouching to study the sand. The ground was marked with fresh tracks, not human, not alien. Something big had moved through here recently. Kaera's eyes scanned the shadows nervously. "What is it?" she asked, before Ethan could answer. A deep growl echoed from above, from the cliff edge. A massive creature appeared, 6 legs, scales like armor, and eyes that glowed in the dim light. The Baron's hunters were not their only problem now. The creature roared, the sound rattling the stone walls. Ethan raised his blaster, but Kaera grabbed his arm. "No," she said quickly. "The noise will draw the hunters." Instead, she stepped forward slowly, her hands raised. The creature's gaze locked on her, its growl lowering. Ethan stared. She wasn't afraid. She spoke softly in her own language, her voice steady. The creature blinked, then stepped back, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan exhaled slowly. "How did you?" Kaera gave a faint smile. "My people lived with them before the Baron came," she said. "They know we're not enemies." They continued through the canyon, moving faster now. But Ethan knew the hunters were close. The traps had slowed them. But they would catch up before nightfall. The wastelands offered no safety. They needed somewhere to make a stand. By sunset, they reached an old outpost, half buried in sand. Its metal walls rusted, but still standing. Ethan checked the inside quickly, empty, but secure enough for a short rest. They barricaded the entrance with broken panels. Kaera sank to the floor, exhaustion finally pulling at her. Ethan kept watch by the doorway, his blaster ready. In the distance, the sound of speeder engines echoed across the dunes. The hunt had not ended. It had only just begun. The old outpost was silent. The wind howled through broken vents, carrying with it the dry scent of the desert night. Kaera sat in the corner, her back against the rusted wall. She could hear Ethan moving near the entrance, his footsteps slow and careful. Every creak of metal felt louder than it should. Every shadow seemed to move outside. The sound of engines grew closer. The Baron's hunters had found their trail. Ethan checked the charge on his blaster, then reached for the EMP grenade. It was his last one. "Kaera," he said quietly, "when I tell you to run, you run and don't look back." Kaera's eyes met his. "I'm not leaving you behind," she said firmly. Ethan didn't argue, but his jaw tightened. The first lights appeared through the cracks in the wall. speeder bikes circled the outpost, their engines rumbling like predators surrounding prey. Voices shouted in the alien tongue, sharp and commanding. The hounds barked, their claws scratching at the sand. Ethan knew they had minutes, maybe less, before the attack. He moved to one of the broken windows, scanning the outside. 5 hunters on speeders, 3 more on foot, and 2 hounds. The Baron hadn't sent his full force, just enough to capture them alive. Ethan could work with that. He pointed to the far wall. There's an old service hatch behind those crates, he said. It leads out to the canyon path. Kaera nodded, already moving toward it, but before she could reach it, the first shot hit the wall, sending a shower of sparks across the room. The hunters had opened fire. Metal groaned under the impact. The hound's snarls grew louder. Ethan ducked low, returning fire through the window. His first shot hit a speeder's engine, sending it spinning into the sand. Kaera grabbed a loose pipe from the floor. She wasn't strong enough to fight like Ethan, but she wouldn't sit and do nothing. Another shot tore through the wall, missing her by inches. The air inside the outpost filled with the smell of burning metal. The hunters advanced. 2 of them moved toward the door, their weapons raised. Ethan pulled the pin on the EMP grenade and rolled it toward them. A sharp flash filled the night, followed by silence. Their weapons went dead. Ethan charged, tackling the nearest one and knocking him to the ground. Kaera swung the pipe at the second, striking his leg and sending him stumbling. The hounds barked wildly, straining against their handler's grip. Go! Ethan shouted. Kaera ran to the service hatch, pushing the crates aside. The hatch was rusted shut, but she used the pipe to pry it open. Cool night air rushed in from the tunnel. Beyond, Ethan, she called. He backed toward her, firing at the hunters who were regrouping. One shot grazed his arm, but he didn't slow down. They slipped into the hatch, the narrow tunnel forcing them to crawl. Behind them, the hunters shouted. The hounds' claws scraped against the metal. Kaera's heart pounded. The tunnel opened into the canyon, moonlight spilling across the rock. For a brief moment, it felt like they had escaped. But then a shadow moved on the cliff above. The Baron himself stepped into view. His armor gleamed under the twin moons, his clawed hands resting on the hilt of a blade made from the bone of some ancient beast. I told you, little bird, he called down, his voice echoing against the canyon walls. You will never be free. Ethan stepped in front of Kaera, his blaster aimed upward. This ends tonight, he said. The Baron laughed. You think you can kill me, human? Ethan didn't answer. He just fired. The shot missed. The Baron had already leapt down, landing with a thud that shook the ground. The fight was brutal and fast. The Baron's blade slashed through the air, forcing Ethan back. Kaera looked around desperately, her eyes landing on a jagged piece of metal half buried in the sand. She grabbed it, the weight familiar in her hands, like the shard she had kept hidden for years. When the Baron lunged at Ethan, Kaera moved. She struck from the side, the shard slicing across the gaps in the Baron's armor. He roared, spinning toward her. But Ethan seized the moment. He fired 3 shots into the exposed plates. The Baron staggered, his blade falling to the ground. For a moment, everything was still. The Baron collapsed onto the sand, his breath rattling. Ethan kicked the blade away, then grabbed Kaera's hand. We have to move, he said. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the Baron's fallen form. 13 years of chains, 13 years of fear, and now, it was over. They climbed out of the canyon, the night air cool against their faces. Neither spoke for a long time. The stars stretched endlessly above them. Kaera glanced at Ethan, her voice quiet but steady. You saved me. Ethan shook his head. You saved yourself, somewhere. Far behind them, the fortress still stood, but the man who had ruled it was gone. The hunt had ended, and for the first time in years, Kaera was truly free. The desert night stretched endlessly around them. The cold wind brushed over Kaera's face, carrying the faint scent of freedom. Every step she took away from the canyon felt lighter, as if the chains she had worn for 13 years were melting into the sand. Beside her, Ethan moved in silence, his eyes scanning the horizon for danger, but his shoulders were less tense now, and there was something softer in his gaze when he glanced at her. They walked until the moon sank lower, casting long shadows over the dunes. By then, Kaera's legs trembled from exhaustion. Ethan stopped, leading her toward a cluster of large rocks that offered shelter from the wind. "Rest here," he said, lowering his pack to the ground. Kaera hesitated, her eyes darting across the open desert. "What if they come after us again?" she asked. "They won't," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "Not tonight." She sat down, drawing her knees to her chest. The silence between them was not awkward. It was heavy with everything they had survived. Kaera's mind replayed the moment the Baron had fallen. She had imagined that day for so long, but when it finally came, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing for the first time. Ethan unrolled a thin blanket and draped it over her shoulders. The warmth seeped into her bones. She looked at him, really looked at him, the tired lines around his eyes, the dust in his hair, the faint cut on his cheek from the fight. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "I did." He answered simply. "You don't even know me," she said. "I didn't need to," Ethan replied. "I knew you didn't deserve what they did to you." The words settled deep inside her. For 13 years, no one had looked at her as anything but property. Now, someone had risked their life to see her as more than that. They stayed in the shelter until the first hints of dawn painted the horizon. Ethan rose, offering her a hand. "There's a place not far from here," he said. "A human settlement, hidden from the Baron's world." Kaera hesitated. "What if they don't want me there?" Ethan gave a faint smile. "They'll want you," he said, "because I'll be there." The journey to the settlement took most of the day. The desert slowly gave way to rocky hills. From a distance, the settlement was almost invisible. Small buildings built into the cliffs, their walls blending with the stone. As they approached, figures appeared on the ridge, weapons ready. Ethan raised his hand, calling out in a language Kaera didn't understand. The guards lowered their weapons and stepped aside. Inside, the settlement felt alive in a way Kaera hadn't seen in years. Children ran between the houses, laughter echoing through the narrow streets. The air smelled of cooking food and clean water. Kaera stopped, her eyes wide. "It's safe here?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "As safe as anywhere in this galaxy." He led her to a small home at the edge of the settlement. The walls were simple, but the door was sturdy. Inside, it was warm and clean. A table, a bed, and shelves, lined with supplies. "This will be yours," Ethan said. Kaera blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "Mine?" "Yes," he said. "You don't have to sleep in chains anymore." For a long moment, Kaera just stood there, her hand resting on the doorframe. She had imagined freedom 1,000 different ways, but never like this. Not in a home, not with someone standing beside her who meant it when he said she was safe. As the days passed, Kaera began to heal. The bruises faded. The constant ache in her muscles eased. She learned the names of the people in the settlement, helped in the kitchen, and even began to smile again. But no matter what she was doing, she always knew where Ethan was. Sometimes you would catch her looking at him, and he would give her that same calm smile he had the first day they met. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs, Kaera found him sitting outside, sharpening his knife. She sat beside him in silence for a while. Then she said, "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," he replied without looking up. "You gave me back my life," she said quietly. "You took it back yourself," Ethan answered. "I just helped you find the way out." Her hand brushed against his. It was a small touch, but it carried more meaning than either of them could put into words. For Kaera, it meant trust, something she had thought she'd never give again. For Ethan, it meant responsibility, not out of obligation, but out of choice. That night, as Kaera lay in the bed Ethan had given her, she stared at the ceiling. She thought about the girl she had been 13 years ago, the girl who had been taken from her home, and she thought about the woman she was now. The Baron was gone. The chains were broken, and the darkness was behind her. She wasn't just alive, she was free. The next morning, when she stepped outside, Ethan was waiting, without a word. She walked up to him and wrapped her arms around him. It was not the desperate embrace of a prisoner clinging to survival. It was the steady, quiet embrace of someone who had found where she belonged. Ethan's arms closed around her, solid and certain. "You're safe now," he murmured. Kaera smiled against his chest. "I know," she whispered, and for the first time in 13 years, she truly believed it.